It makes sense to me how this new exploration and frontier of expressing self through art and living in a non-linear way.
You can do the painting, the dancing, the poem, but if there's no somatic energy exchange...
What if creativity wasn't just performance, but a sacred act of healing where art, spirit, and science meet? Hello and welcome to Wisdom Stripes. I'm Meg Tuohey, and today we're exploring creativity as a path to transformation, how the body, mind, and soul work together to bring art, purpose, and meaning to life. Our guest is Kaye Tuckerman, a multi-award-winning director, performer, writer, and designer from Sydney, Australia, whose artistry spans stage, film, and academia. Kaye's extraordinary career includes Broadway roles in Mamma Mia and Wicked, performances alongside Russell Crowe and Jennifer Hudson, and major film credits in The Matrix sequels and The Girl Who Got Away. Beyond performance, she's a designer, nominated for an African Academy Award, and now a PhD candidate researching shamanism and the creative process, exploring holistic, embodied approaches to creativity. Kaye's story is one of reinvention, resilience, and deep curiosity, a journey that challenges how we define art, healing, and success. This is Wisdom Stripes, your no-nonsense, fierce fairy godmothers, turning pain and confusion into clarity and confidence. Kaye, we always begin with the same question for our guests. What wisdom would you like a listener to come away with today?
Experience, explore, reflect, analyze, and rediscover.
That sounds like quite a process.
That is quite a process. But I think it's a process that we've been taught to not do. I think everything now is moving so fast and it is so linear and so end goal based. And if you do something that creates an end product, the end product is like, check, tick, you get a mark for that. But if you're invested in experiencing and exploring, and there's no tick for that. You don't get points for that. So when you're asked, especially as a creative, well, what did you make? How much was it worth? Did you sell it? How much do you earn? There's all these linear labels and end product labels and goal-based achievement that is validated by a third external party that apparently makes you or labels you as good or bad, as opposed to sitting in experience and investing and exploring in experience and non-linear intuitive discovery. And so when you're in that realm, the goals are intangible at that point. You're still in process. And yet how do we as creatives, stay in that zone of exploration and experience and reflection without feeling invalidated by linear process, by pace, by speed, by having to make something that's tangible.
Also exist in a world where rent and food and bills and clothes and aliveness costs more than it ever has.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's, especially if we're talking in the creative realm and the arts, there is a real practicality. There is a need to, realistically exist in the material world. Yet that's become so much of the focus as opposed to the real value of creativity, the real value of creative thinking. And we really saw it during, I think the pandemic. And it's interesting how the two pandemics, the 1918 Spanish pandemic and cast your mind back to 2020, where, I don't know, I feel like the universe was like, you've all been naughty, all of you go to your room, all of you have a big think about what you've done to the planet and each other and yourselves, reconnect for a bit. And what do we see? Everybody posting things on this strange land of social media, like, I've made a cake, I've got out my watercolors for the first time in 20, 10, 15, 40 years. I've found some sourdough starter. I've done macrame, or macrame as some people might like to pronounce it. I've done crochet and really started creating things. I've done a drawing, and you go, oh, and how are these things valuable? And they may not be valuable in terms of a monetary, material, way, but in terms of a personal process and feeling reconnected with self or family, there's the value, And I mean, there's that hilarious joke of that wonderful comedian who couldn't pay a bill. This was before the pandemic, but he couldn't pay any of his bills. So he did a stick drawing of a spider, and he sent it to the CEOs of this company and said, I know this isn't the $60 bill that I owe you, but I feel that my drawing is worth $60. And all it was a stick drawing of a spider. And it's hilarious. And this back and forth went back about, well, you can't pay with a Sharpie drawing of a spider. He's like, but I really feel my art is valued at the amount of the bill. And it went back and forth. But I don't know, how do we as creative thinkers, creative beings, intuitives, empaths, compassionate people, how do we reclaim that value in non-linear thought process, non-linear creativity, exploration, investigative thinking that isn't, I need this done by the end of the day? Mm-hmm. How do we get there by going the curvy roads as opposed to, I've done it?
Yeah. And how do we reconcile the needs we have as humans to exist with the path that's on our heart? I call that our heart print, like a thumbprint, like who we're supposed to be, and explore. So beyond or alongside perhaps your idea of the nonlinear way of living is, if your heart is an artist or creative and you still need to live and exist in a world which of course has a contract of some degree in terms of this is what it costs to be alive, how do you reconcile that if it doesn't match your own journey?
Yeah, it's really, it's a really interesting question, because I think as younger people, there will be some children, younger people, who inherently are drawn towards, making up a dance routine, doing a little painting. I've made up a little song. I've done a poem and I'd like to do it at my kindergarten class. There are some children who will inherently lean that way.
Yes.
And there are others who are like, I'm happy to sit down, I'm happy to do as I'm told. And sure, as a society, there's a sense of cohesion and learning so that we can all function together.
Yes.
And then as we get a little bit older, there's sort of this, generally speaking, we don't have enough time to go into, full on like educational process. But generally speaking, around 7 or 8, we get a bit of a rude awakening. Sit down. Don't touch your ruler. Don't look at the person next to you. Look at the teacher. Do exactly as you're told. And we're really this linear process starts. Don't sing and dance. Don't do your painting. Don't draw in your book. Do as you're told. And you go, okay, so there's an element that, to your point of we're learning to balance what we do as an inherent creative and what we do, to be able to follow the rules.
Yeah, to be able to be in society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and then we start, as creatives, we start to go, okay, yeah, I can do that. But I still want to do my singing, my dancing and my painting, or read my poem, or do my writing exercise and have a good time. And at some point, we start to go, am I the only one that functions in this intuitive or non-linear way? And we go, oh no, it must be just me. So these inherently creative thinkers start to retreat and get frightened. And then at some point, they start to go, oh, no, there must be someone like me. Or they see another kid dancing in the corner or singing a song, or there's a little creative group, maybe a band or a writing group or an amateur theatre company or, a choir. And they go, oh, there are others like me. There are others who think in this different way, this intuitive, left or right brain way. And they start to find a tribe. And they go, oh, thank God, I do belong somewhere. There are others. And you see the spark, and mathematics is very creative. You see kids find a mathematics group or a piano group, and then at some point there's a break. There's some point where, you're told, don't do that. And it's really painful, for the inherently creative thinker or child. And this break might come whether they go into professional performance, whether it's, music or singing or acting or dance. There's a break that happens, whether, to your point, they can't make the money to pay the bills. A family member is unwell and they have to tend to the family. They get married, have a family, their own family, and have to look after kids. And there's an inherent reality of balancing the material with the creative. And it's like, I can't do the performing, be in rehearsals, and get a kid to school and make all the meals and, so this pressure starts to build, or an injury happens, or a sickness happens. I did an incredible interview with an amazing friend who, as a little kid, just danced, didn't fit in anywhere, and his mum was like, oh, this kid's a creative. I'm not, and I don't know where there's a dancing school in the little town that we live in. And this mum, God love her, found a place for this kid. And she said, oh, maybe we'll go here today. And he describes his mum's face watching him, seeing all these other kids dancing in a class. This moment of realisation that other kids were like, he wasn't alone. And then fast forward, he was performing professionally. He was doing incredibly well. And all of a sudden he realised as a dancer he was doing pirouettes and his balance was off. And he was like, oh, it's weird. Maybe I've got like an inner ear infection or, a little virus or something. Kept going to the doctor and they're like, yeah, just a virus. You'll be right. You'll be good. He said it just kept going and kept going and kept going. And then finally he kept saying, something is off because my dancing, I can't balance. And I'm on stage and I'm falling out of turns and managing to cover it. But he just knew something was off. He was diagnosed with an incredibly rare cluster brain cancer. He was pulled out of shows and started treatment immediately. And so this, for him, was the break. This was the breaking point where it was like, oh, It wasn't injury, it wasn't family responsibility, it wasn't parent responsibility, it wasn't trying to pay the rent. It was an illness that was the break in the creative process for him. And that's, I think, where a lot of creatives, they have that moment of, can I do this anymore? Can I do it differently? Does it just all stop? And how do I then, in this process of experiencing, reflecting, analysing, how do I, in this process of analysing the breakdown of my creative process, how does it shift into something else? Does it? And it's a real pain that, creatives, go through in their creative process, through their creative trajectory of reassessing and reinvigorating how they can return to a sense of balance and what that is. And if it's really trying on a professional elite level to get back into that world, can they? Do they have to? If they can't, what do they do? How do they fulfill that deep, 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 yearning of this is how they function?
Their heart print. How do they live in congruence with their heart print?
Right.
When the creative process is blocked for some of those reasons you've mentioned, or something we haven't mentioned.
Yeah.
You talked about the world, the creative world. It's one that you've inhabited most of your life, all of your life.
Yeah.
And you've inhabited the highest places, Broadway, the other introductory items that I talked about, the people you've collaborated with. Tell us about the world from your vantage point. Tell us about what it's like to be on Broadway.
Yeah. I mean, it seems strange, doesn't it? Because, you grow up as a kid from the northern beaches of Sydney who, my dream was to be, a hairdresser, because that's what I knew. That's what I thought. I'll go to the beach, I'll surf, I'll do people's hair, because that's which is creative. But then I couldn't. So there was a very early break because I had very bad eczema, and the dermatologist was like, oh, no, you can't do hair. I'm like, what? No. And so there's an example of a very early creative break. But, as a little kid in, going to little preschool, like 3 or 4 years of age, my preschool teacher, Miss Adrian, she just let me brush her hair all day. Now, she must have been having a great time. She's like, there's this kid that brushes my hair for like 8 hours or 4 hours. I had a great time. But then when I went to kindergarten, I used to make up little shows. I used to do little shows at lunchtime or little lunchtime. And so there was this inherent need to create in some ways. And then it wasn't until, much later, when I was about 8 or 9, I guess, that the dermatologist crushed my dreams. But somehow in that inherent flow, it was like, oh, my dad had a student who was involved with an amateur musical society, and off I went, and we'd seen Annie around that time, and I was like, oh, I can't be a hairdresser, but I'll do that. And off I went to do amateur musicals. I was like, oh, again, for me, there's that journey of like, oh, I do fit in somewhere. I could do this. I was bad at it. I was really bad at it. I was very shy, very introverted, still. And but there was a director, and he was a hoofer from New York, and he said, yeah, Broadway. And I was like, yeah, what is it? That's what I'm going to do. I didn't even know what it was. And he told me all about Broadway, all about it was in there. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. There's no comprehension as a teenager that you need a visa. That's it.
You need to fit in society to be able to
right.
Go and do the thing.
Right, but there's that interesting thing about somehow seeing it in your mind's eye.
Yes.
And creating it, and somehow it, in shamanic terms, they talk about time and space. There's no concept of how long that time frame is or what that space is to get there, but somehow it's going to happen. And then, so yeah, I mean, obviously I trained, I did all the shows, and somehow this river gets you to Broadway. But, he was a wonderful, wonderful man. And, at the end of his life, I would go and visit him in hospice in Sydney all the time, and we would talk about Broadway. And I promised him just before he passed that I would be on Broadway. And so I feel like there was this contract that I'd made this promise to this incredible human being. And, it took years to get there via Kenya, via Asia, via Australia, New Zealand, all over the place to get to this Broadway dream. And that was a really interesting process because I was involved with this production from the get-go, from the very early workshop stages, early readings, and watching the creative team put it all together, and then out-of-town tryouts, and then coming to Broadway. And then what was interesting about that process of it was the highest of the high and the lowest of the low simultaneously, because I got injured and was pulled from the show while I was rehabbing, and I'd never been injured before. Like in all the shows I'd done, I'd never had a vocal injury, I'd never had a body injury, and it was something very strange to process of how those two worlds coexisted simultaneously, and how, the biggest dream and everything you'd worked towards was also the most painful, physically painful, but emotionally and mentally painful. And so it's interesting to talk about. And I did I headlined at Adelaide Cabaret Festival with a show that I'd written about that process. And I was like, I don't know how this is going to go. Like, who wants to hear this? And it was interesting when I sort of, you tell those stories of like, and I got on Broadway and everyone's like, oh my God, that's so amazing. And then I remember the first time I did the show, audible gasp from the audience when I said I got injured and was pulled from the show. And I was like, oh, that wasn't the response I anticipated, because I was just simply telling the trajectory of the story. And, I certainly wasn't telling it from a perspective of like, boo-hoo, feel sorry for me. Like, it wasn't that at all. And I eventually got back into the show because I worked so hard to rehab my body, and I was back on Broadway stage, and, I'd made my Broadway debut, and it was really very, very exciting. But it's interesting how, the highs came with such lows, and the dream came with such a nightmare. And it was like, in shamanic terms again, in the middle world, you're doing all the work to achieve those goals, and the highs come from the upper world. And yet the nightmare comes with, really digging deep into the lower realms to understand what that whole picture is. It's not just, haha, I've done the work now, I'm on the stage and I've sing my song and goodbye. It really, there's this much bigger vibrational, story than just doing the high kick, which I'm not very good at the high kick, but, interesting trajectory. Yeah. But interesting too, like, doing the show in Adelaide and talking about that experience, is talking to people in the audience after the show, and one in particular, he was like, just wasn't going to come to the show because it was like a cabaret and it was going to be some song and dance, everything's so happy, And he said, I've got to be really honest with you, I've been suffering with gut-wrenching depression. And to see you share a story that was so not what the story was meant to be And he said it's probably the most healing show I've seen in a very long time. And I was like, oh, I hadn't thought of it in that way.
Isn't that the beauty of art?
Well, yeah.
The shared humanity that comes through art.
100%. Yeah. And there, you know, if we go back to the beginning of the conversation, what is the value of art, artistic thinking, creative thinking, thinking of the flow of the non-linear process and the highs and the lows? So if the river goes like this, it's traveling east and the flow is east and west. And if you think of the mountains, the flow is north and south. So in the shamanic compass, you know, you're looking at all the energies of the hummingbird, the eagle, the snake, and the horse, and there are different animal spirits in those realms, but it's the sidewinding and the highs and the lows that encompass everything in the spectrum of humanic. You can't just go, I'm walking there. It's like, okay. I mean, you can walk from A to B, but did you have to walk around somebody else to get there? Did you go into a shop to get there? Did you go underground to take the subway? Did you have to go up the stair? Like, what are the, you know, what mountain, hills and valleys are you crossing through? What, you know, are you going around rocks in the river to get there? What's the full human experience rather than I got up and I went back to sleep? Okay, cool.
Because that is accurate from one lens.
For sure.
It's not inaccurate. And yet what you're asking us to look at is the depth and the detail of the most seemingly mundane elements of the human life. And you're saying there's a potential richness and above and a below and a sideways look.
Yeah. And we need, I mean, you know, to your point too, like there is, I mean, what's Eliade is an amazing shamanic writer, and he talks about the mundane and the profane. And, you know, sometimes we just need that simplicity.
Oh, yes. It's very restorative.
For sure.
Yeah.
For
Especially
sure.
if you've done a big journey.
Yeah.
A real human journey of illness, pain, suffering, confusion, loss.
Yeah.
Simpleness, simple pleasures is where we restore ourselves.
For sure. Yeah. And then if we're entering that expansive space, how do we breathe into that expansiveness? You know?
I do know.
I bet you do.
I do. So, New Zealand icon, gladiator, Russell Crowe.
Legend.
Tell us. Hi, wise woman. Meg here. Have you ever felt like you're doing all the right things, but something still feels off? Here's what I've learned after helping thousands of people navigate their deepest challenges. You haven't lost yourself. Your true essence, what I call your heart print, is still there, waiting beneath the daily pressures, societal expectations, and that constant feeling that you should be more than you are. In my new book, I share the intimate story of two women who will help you remember who you are and trust your inner wisdom again. Visit megantuohey.com/book to pre-order Heartprint and begin your journey back to yourself.
That's amazing. I mean, Big Russ.
I've never met him.
It's funny, I actually first met Russell Crowe, and I don't know Russell very well. Probably don't know Russell at all. But what an icon. And I first met Russell very briefly when he was doing the Rocky Horror Picture Show in Melbourne.
Australia,
not Florida.
Yeah.
And it was the very beginning of his career, you know. And he came right up to me, and I had braids in my hair. He goes, "I'm Russ." And I'm like, "I know, I just saw the show. I know who you are." He said, "I said, you're great." He goes, "I like your hair." And I'm like, "Great, that's great." And that was kind of it. And then his career skyrocketed, as it should, and he's a remarkable, remarkable talent. Remarkable. And then I had this opportunity to work with him on episode 1 of The Loudest Voice. And, you know, he didn't remember me, and there wasn't an opportunity to remind him of that famous first meeting. And I'll tell you, working with him on set that day was unbelievable. He's a master of the craft. And watching him, we had this massive scene at a boardroom table with this massive, like, camera crane. And this camera crane moved past this boardroom of people. And watching him craft his dialogue as the camera would move in between the heads of these actors, so that for cutting, every line of his was clean. Like, the editors must have just gone, oh, this guy's unbelievable. Because as the camera pulled into, you know, the space between the other actors' heads, he just smashed out dialogue. And I'm like, you are unbelievable. He'd been in makeup for 4 hours, then on set, in that costume and prosthetics. He must have been so uncomfortable and so hot, and he was just on it. On it. And he deserves every single success he has. Unbelievable.
So, super talent.
Yeah.
Absolutely meant for what he did.
For sure. For sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the next logical question to ask you? Where do we need to go so that you get to share your wisdom in a way that allows your heart to feel coherent?
Consciously connecting with intuition to step into experiencing, explore the experiential world, reflect, analyze or assess. I changed the word to assess because analyze can just sound a bit academic or a bit serious, you know, but reflect and deepen the reflection into an assessment of how you can step back into further, more deeply connected experiencing for the purpose of deeper discovery.
How does shamanism fit here? Well, maybe we should describe what shamanism is first. We have had an episode with a shaman.
I know, I listened.
Robin Cole.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can go search for that,
I
listeners.
did.
Yeah, you
yeah,
did?
I did.
Mm.
Yeah.
But perhaps for those who haven't caught that episode, what is shamanism?
A deep connection to the earth wisdom that is in the environmental vibrational space.
Mm. And how does shamanism connect to your life and your work and your next evolution?
The groundedness. And that doesn't mean just like, oh, I feel grounded. It's that deep feeling of roots growing through the energetic makeup of our physical being that grow down deep into the earth and beyond, the roots that energetically grow through our physical being out into the space, up through, a common term would be the crown chakra, up into the etheric field beyond what is this material physical being that we exist in. And if we really think of that in atomic cellular terms, how does that vibrate out and interconnect us And how do we also draw energy back into our energy meridians within the atomic cellular makeup of our bodies, and how that energy just interconnects us, that conscious interconnection, that we are all integrated in this material world as one, but how do we interconnect with the energies that we really vibe with, and how do we, create safe space in that auric field? Kindness, generosity, warmth, sharing interconnected experience.
I was going to say connection. Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me how this new exploration and frontier that you're working through at the PhD level matches how we started this interview of expressing self through art and living in a non-linear way.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and it's, all that somatic energy, and as, say, performers or creative, you can do the painting, the dancing, the poem, but if there's no somatic energy exchange, the audience goes, yeah, good,
So
nice, I liked it.
Let's just define somatic energy exchange is a body reaction to artists' work.
Yeah.
So a felt, lived experience in an audience member.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you're saying art needs to have a somatic exchange from the artist to the observer or receiver.
It doesn't need to.
Ideally has.
Correct.
And that is how it connects to shamanism, because that is about the body.
Correct.
In space through the subatomic particle connections.
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah. Correct.
What do you think the connection is for our listeners? What can our listeners take from these beautiful, interconnected constellations of ideas that you've gathered across your life? What's the thing for our listeners where there is something that belongs with them in their everyday life, which might look and feel and sound very different to yours, whilst also they have those echoes of knowing and remembrance and understanding for themselves?
It's the child, it's the energy of the child, and we're all in this together, right? So, if you could see my words or your words, or you're listening to a song or something on the radio or a different podcast, or you're seeing a street performer, you're seeing a piece of art, how do my words or the words of the speaker or the colors on a painting or the movement of a dancer, how do you translate that into a vibration that hits you somewhere in your body, in your senses, in your multi-senses? And then how do you give that back? How did that response, how do you give that back? If it's a theatre, it might be through applause. If it's a painting, is it a smile on your face? It is a visceral response to that somatic vibration. And we're in this together. We're all in this, in a time in history where everything seems more and more divisive or disassociated or switched off, or this into our phones. How do we get back to this and sharing energy? I don't know. Does that answer the question?
I think it's the most beautiful thing. It's a reminder that our body allows us to engage with other people and their work and their experiences. And when we allow ourselves to feel the energy exchange from the art, whether the artist is there or not, we are attuned with that response in our bodies, then we are shifting our experience and expanding ourselves. We are in the force of giving and receiving. And that is something that I think changes our dynamic in the way that we live and the way that we then enter the next section or segment of our day. And I think that is incredible wisdom that you've given us today, Kaye.
Oh, you're welcome.
You know, Kaye, it brings us to our last question.
Our last question.
Our last question. And our last question is the same as our first question, which is, what wisdom would you like to leave a listener with today?
Consciously step into the experiential realm. Consciously select an experience. Get up, move, engage with nature. Experience consciously. I saw A, I heard A, I felt A, I tasted A, I smelt A. Then sit back, reflect. The thing I smelt was ABC, XYZ, here, there. The thing I touched was this, that, ABC, XYZ. What are the visceral, multisensory reflections from your experience? Then, academic word, analyze. Softer word, assess. What did you emotionally, spiritually, mentally, physically take away from that experience, that reflection? Then dive in again. Dive into the experience again to reinforce, reinvigorate, return to balance, rediscover, discover anew. And keep that process going. Don't get stuck in, I got up, I did this, without consciously really feeling viscerally for yourself and engaging with your lived experience on this journey, on this planet that we, coexist with each other and the lived environment, the breath, the ground, the air, the fire, the water, the elements that give to us on a daily basis.
So then what I'm hearing, and maybe this is oversimplifying, is that if we think about the elements the world gives us every day, are we receiving them and being in gratitude for them, like the applause in a theatre or the smile at the artwork? Are we able to be appreciative and return that figure 8 infinity symbol in order to access our peace, contentment, well-being?
Yeah.
What a beautiful piece of wisdom to end this conversation on. Thank you so much.
Oh, mate, you're welcome. Thank you.
A sincere and heartfelt thank you to Kaye Tuckerman for joining me today on Wisdom Stripes. Her story reminds us that creativity is not just a craft, it's a communion between mind, body, and spirit. Kaye's journey from the northern beaches of Sydney to Broadway to holistic research challenges us to create with compassion, curiosity, and courage, and reminds us to receive and to give in equal amounts. To learn more about Kaye's work, visit kayetuckerman.com or follow Kaye Tuckerman on social media. And to stay connected with me, follow @Meg Tuohey Official on Instagram. Thank you for listening to Wisdom Stripes. I'm Meg Tuohey. I hope you gained a little wisdom today. Thank you for listening to this episode of Wisdom Stripes. Follow me on @Meg Tuohey Official and leave a comment and review. I'm looking forward to meeting you here next time on Wisdom Stripes.